I want to talk briefly about the Freedom Convoy organizers in Canada. They're being abused like hell, ladies and gentlemen. Do you think Canada's a free country? It's not a free country. It's a tyranny. I've talked about tyranny so many times over the more than 5 years I've been doing this program, 20 years on radio. Tyranny comes in different forms. It can be in the form of an elected parliament, an elected Congress, the form of a bureaucracy. It can be structured as more of a monopolistic, centralized type of a situation, or a mobocracy. That's why our framers were such geniuses. And the founders of this country in the Declaration of Independence, that's why they talked about unalienable rights. Those unalienable rights belong to you, whether there's a parliament, a Congress, a president, a dictator, or whatever it is. Those are individual human rights. Well, they don't exist in Canada unless you're of the hard left. It's like what America's becoming. But I want you to look at this at CTV News. What's happening to these Freedom Convoy organizers? Go.
About a month after police moved in on convoy protesters who occupied Ottawa's downtown core for more than 3 weeks, there are now new charges laid against some protest leaders. Let's bring in CTV News senior political correspondent Glenn McGregor, who has the latest. Hi, Glenn. What happened in court today?
Yeah, we learned today that the Crown prosecutors have leveled more charges against 4 people who had previously been charged with some lesser offenses, mischief, counseling to commit mischief, violating...
I wonder if they're charged with parading and trespassing. Go ahead.
Case. Now they've increased the number of charges against them and also the severity of them. More serious charges like intimidation and obstructing police and counseling others to obstruct police. These are pretty serious charges under the criminal code. And they're also proceeding in a sort of a different way than we've seen in the past. They decided to charge 2 organizers together, that is Pat King and George Billings, who had been previously charged and are now both currently in jail. And then also one of the most visible faces of the protest, Tamara Leach, is now being charged together with Chris Barber. They're both back in Alberta out on bail for now, awaiting trial, but they're now facing charges that could see them, if they were convicted, going to jail for some considerable length of time, Justin.
Oh my Lord, they're trying to demonstrate. Don't you dare protest against our government. These were peaceful protests, ladies and gentlemen. I want you to think about the civil rights protests half a century ago. It's been half a century, it's amazing, but half a century ago. I want you to think about Gandhi in India and his peaceful protests. So when people who believe in liberty, people who believe in economic freedom and the freedom of their body, I'm not talking about abortion where 2 bodies are more involved. I'm talking about vaccines and so forth, where people actually got the virus already and they didn't want a vaccine shot. And mandates were being lifted all over the place, except for the truckers. I want you to think about that the leaders of this movement are going to serve serious time in prison if they're found guilty. And of course they will be, because it's a setup. I mean, they did what they did. But I want you to understand that peaceful protests that create inconveniences, that create circumstances like we saw in Canada and so forth. This is allowable. This is what I would argue traditional in societies like ours. But you see what's happening in Canada. You see what happens in a country like Israel when they go after their Prime Minister Netanyahu. And you see what's happening in our country with the January 6th committee, where they're trying to throw people in prison for contempt of Congress when they won't comply 100% and salute and click their heels in front of this Pelosi rogue Stalinist committee, which is leaking information, trying to get Trump criminally charged, trying to goose the Department of Justice to go after him. And that's all this is about. It's a horrible, horrible thing. You look at these 3 countries, they're all in decline. But Canada here, putting people in prison for this, you look at our country. We have people who've been in jail, there's scores of them, what I call our gulag, and it is, in Washington, D.C. for parading and trespassing. The leftists parade and trespass all the time. They do more than that. They beat the hell out of people. They assault them. They burn their buildings. They riot violently. They attack our police. They do this, as a matter of course, and they certainly did it in the summer of 2020. I don't remember too many of them being charged with parading and trespassing, let alone other charges, quite frankly. Go ahead.
And Ottawa police appeared at a parliamentary committee. Glenn, what happened there?
Boy, it's tough to be a host in Canada, isn't it? Hey, people showed up in parliament. Glenn, what happened? Hey, there was a court hearing. Glenn, what happened? I guess she gets the big bucks. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is the committee that's reviewing the government's use of the Extraordinary Emergencies Act that they thought was necessary to bring the protest to an end. And we heard testimony from the Ottawa police chief saying, yes, it was a very useful tool. And also the chief of the commissioner of the Ontario Provincial Police. And he told the committee that a week before the government decided to invoke the act, his police force had learned that this protest was not just a danger to public safety and security, but also to national security.
Oh, I see. So they cherry-pick their police chiefs, they bring them in, and the police chiefs are testifying that what they did was crucially important. Crucially important. And there's the media, just like in the U.S., just like in Israel, just like in so much of the so-called free world, mimicking, parroting what the government tells them. Go ahead.
And so we think that warning may have gotten passed on to the federal government, and that's the reason why they decided...
That's enough. We hear enough crap by our own media.
Want to see more? Sign up for Levin TV.